Okay, hello everybody. This is Soraya with the Purposeful Professional Media, where we interview people, and we are the podcast for your career, right? The people and the culture. So we're really excited to talk today with Diane Van Staden, Dr. Diane Van Staden, who is really she's a gift, she's a gem, and I'm really excited to get into her story. So welcome, Diane. Introduce yourself to the people in the
Thank you
podcast.
so much, Soraya. It's an absolute delight to be on the Purposeful Professional podcast. My name is Dr. Diane, and as Soraya introduced, I trained as an optometrist in South Africa some 20 plus years ago. But currently, I'm a career pivot strategist for health professionals who want to purposefully pivot their careers in line with their gifts, skills, and talents. And I'm also a podcast host of Life Beyond Clinical Practice, which is really aligned with that purpose and mission of serving the healthcare community. So it's so awesome to be here. I think there's lots packed into my career journey, which I hope to share today. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity.
Yeah, super excited, super excited. So we usually open with a pop culture discussion that we call Pop Purpose, where we talk with guests about pop culture topics related to their career. But I think for you, I wanted to have a social impact discussion because during our pre-call, what resonated with me is how impactful you are as a human and the things that you've done. I mean, the whole conversation, the pre-call conversation, listeners, I wish y'all could have heard that because we even really connected well over the pre-call. So I wanted to give them a couple of those nuggets and give you an opportunity to share that wisdom. So my first question for you is, I want to talk about lifting others up and this concept of lifting others up. So I want to open with a quote that you said, which resonated with me so deeply. You said, "You are here to lift up those behind you." Can you tell me, like, why do you feel that way?
I feel strongly that all of us have a purpose on this earth, and it comes from my faith walk and my faith belief that God created each of us for a unique purpose. And that purpose can be lived out in various ways throughout our lives. But also, I believe that everyone has a story, and your story has power, and your story can influence others and help others. The lessons from your journey can help others. And so, as I matured in my professional career, I recognized that my learnings were of value to others who were 1, 2, 3, 10 steps behind me. And that it was, the onus was on me to then give back, to lift the others up. I had I did have a few people along my career path who opened doors for me, and I'm very grateful for them. But I think if I had that kind of guidance much earlier on in my career, I could have gone much further, much faster. And so I see my almost giving back, lift as you rise. And as I've grown in my career, it's really part of my value system to help other people to rise as well by imparting some of what I've learned, opening up doors and networks to others who really are hungry to grow. So it comes from my faith and my value system and my belief that we are here to make an impact in the world, and through our lives, our life stories, whether that be our personal or professional lives, we can help others achieve their own goals and purposes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I do love that. And yes, I am very similar spiritually. Like, I do believe in God, and I believe that He has brought us here for a purpose, like you said, beyond ourselves. So I really do love your sharing of that, and also your reflection on how it was an absence of that sort of guidance that made you realize I can pay it forward in ways that others didn't pay it forward for me. So I think that's a wonderful benefit. But I also do have another question for those who might be listening to this and saying, well, I don't think my lives are that I don't think my life, is that consequential, right? So my second question for you is, like, what would you say to someone who doesn't feel that their lives are that consequential, or that their purpose involves lifting someone else up?
So firstly, I'd like to challenge their perception or belief that their lives are not consequential. Every life has value. Every life is here for a purpose. And an individual may think that their life or their life journey or their life story is insignificant, but there's power in every story. The story is different. The message, the lessons may be different, but there's power to be imparted to others through your story. There isn't one yardstick to measure success, and success comes in various forms. It may be coming out of, a difficult childhood that is your life lesson that you can help others, lift others up with, It may be
Mhm.
like I did, charting my own course in academia and learning how to grow my career that now I'm helping others with. So every story has value. I don't believe any life is inconsequential. So I think going back to what influences your own perceptions that your story or your life is inconsequential is very important. Reflecting on those things and perhaps why you're downplaying your significance as an individual. We are all given the same measure of life. And it's what we do with our life and our story and our life experience, good or bad. But we can use those opportunities to improve our future. We may not be able to change the past, but how can we use what we've gone through to chart a new course and then to help others along the way? And then the second part of your question, sorry, today was, I think I answered the first part. Yeah.
Yeah. So why people who don't believe that their purpose involves lifting
Oh,
someone
yeah.
else up? What would
Yeah. So, when it comes to purpose, each of our purposes take on different forms. And sometimes,
mm,
if you're thinking of it vocationally, your profession may not involve, directly influencing individuals and lifting them up. But by simply living out your story authentically, someone out there will hear it and indirectly it will lift them up. So not all of us are in the front face of lifting others up or have platforms to help people, whether one on one or whether mass scale like you doing through media platforms. But I think living out your journey, your purpose authentically, indirectly, people will see, they will hear, and they will draw life lessons from your story that can then lift them up. So, whether directly or indirectly, our lives and our stories have power. And so, that is a truth that everyone should hold on to and pursue with everything in them, that their life message has impact, regardless of whether they're doing it consciously or not.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I agree with you, but I had to ask that question because I see people, whether we say it or not, acting as if
Yeah.
our lives don't have any
Mm-hmm.
consequences. And even then, acting as if our purpose doesn't involve other people. We see people who completely go into fields of work or even, take on different jobs or even start businesses for the sole purpose of building wealth and not really thinking, okay, well, what's my bigger picture? Like, why do I do what I do? So I see you as a woman of purpose. So I wanted you to vocalize and verbalize, like, why is it important for us to see our lives as being interconnected? Because honestly, I can say, I don't know how it is in Canada, but in the US, we don't operate like we have a bigger purpose. We're very self-focused and we're very selfish. We're very selfish as
Mm.
humans, so thank you for sharing.
Yeah, no, you're welcome.
Yeah, yeah. So I think I also wanted to talk to something that you said on the pre-call that I think was really, really important for this section of the conversation. You said that your father told you if someone else can do it, you can do it better. So parents are our first
Oh,
encouragers,
yeah.
our first cheerleaders, our first motivators, right, in life, and they give us the wings that we fly with. But I want to know for you, like, how did it feel as a girl to have that level of belief coming from a male figure in your life?
That was so significant for me. It was so powerful. It was, if I can call it, my compass. I always knew that I could do anything I put my mind to. My father being the man I looked up to, my protector, someone who wants the best for me, validating my potential, validating the fact that I can do it. I am enough. And that if it's to be, it's up to me. That's one of, my favorite sayings that I learned from one of my early mentors, that if you really want something and you put your mind to it and you observe someone else has been successful at something, what's really stopping you from getting there? Because you have what it
Mm,
takes to achieve a level of success that someone else has, but it takes sacrifice. It takes, you know, being purpose driven. It takes being intentional. It takes making the sacrifices, whatever those things are. And so very early on, that message shaped me. And even though I didn't have around me in the community I grew up with immediate role models to sort of be the benchmark for what I wanted to achieve in my life, I always knew that there's another level of attainment, that I can go beyond the limits of what I saw with my physical eyes in the neighborhood I grew up in. And so there was this inner drive to just keep pursuing. What's the next ceiling that I can break? What's the next goal I can achieve? What have others done, and why can't I do that? And if I look back now, as a, a young girl of color growing up in apartheid South Africa, I've broken so many what would otherwise have been historical barriers and boundaries. And I think I want to credit my dad for that. Back to him, if someone else is, I was the first woman of color, being a colored. I know it's a derogatory term in the United States, and in Canada there's sensitivities around that term, but in South Africa, it's an official racial designation which people still refer to on a daily basis. So it's basically a mixed race person. So I was the first mixed race
Mm.
woman in optometry education in South Africa to become an associate professor. I was the first mixed race woman optometrist to achieve, NRF rating, which is a prestigious academic research rating in South Africa. So, these were things I thought, well, others have done it. Why can't I do it? And so it became the next goal and the next benchmark. And so those words were incredibly powerful coming from my dad. And I don't want to say if he didn't imprint them in me that I may not have been successful, but I do think that they just kept driving me to the next level of success.
Yeah, I definitely think that's amazing. I think that's amazing that you had that validation and you had that support, especially like you said, growing up and being, racially
Right.
othered in South Africa. It was so important that your home environment fostered that positive sense of self-worth and that positive self-image. And one thing I know is it starts
Oh,
at
for
home.
sure.
Like for a lot of us, who we've become started at home. It started with the lessons that we received when we were younger from our parents, from our caregivers, whether good or bad. We can see connections right now as adults. We can see and we can reap those connections to our childhood. So thank you. Thank you so much for shedding light on that. I want to ask you though, like in the broader picture, I'm sure growing up in apartheid in South Africa, you experienced a lot of parents not having that
Oh,
belief in their
yeah.
children and not knowing, what was going to happen, or if people that look like us or speak like us or talk like us or live where we live, right, will be able to succeed. So my next question for you is like, why do you think some parents lack the level of confidence and belief in themselves and then subsequently pass that down to their children?
Well, I have to say that I think to a large extent it comes from, well, parents who don't believe in themselves possibly were not validated as children. It's not necessarily always the case, but possibly they didn't have that validation. In fact, they may have been put down and spoken negative things spoken over them to limit their belief in themselves and what they could accomplish in their lives. And then those, if not broken, those negative patterns just are reinforced to the next generation, which is so unfortunate. It also is about mindset and choice. Uh, if I can say that, going back to my dad as my role model and someone who really, imprinted a mindset of success in me, he didn't have the level of validation. He was born to a mother who didn't really want to parent him. He got passed around between grandmothers and aunts and uncles and never had a stable upbringing. Was very intelligent, knew he had potential, needed to drop out of high school to earn a living to support the family. And that was his narrative, and negative words were spoken over him. They were not spoken kindly to as children, as children. In fact, they were seen as an inconvenience because of the situation. Parents were trying to sort of just survive, and, another child seemed like another financial burden. And despite that, my dad, without a formal education, went on to have a very successful career. Two things: mindset. He also realized that he had potential within him, even though he didn't have the opportunities or support, but he knew his
Mm.
potential. And in his early 20s, he also came to faith in God. And so I think those two things, the mindset that I know there's something more in me and I want to pursue that, and that God created me for a purpose. And if the creator lives in me, I can do anything I put my mind to, and become a person of value in this earth. And that's the message he lived right up to he's retired now, and he's still giving back. He's still a lifelong learner. He's still a mentor of other young people. He's still an avid reader. So it's about mindset. So you may not have grown up in the most ideal circumstances. You may not have had the support or financial means or whatever it is to sort of tick the formal boxes, on paper, but it's what you believe within yourself that can really change or shape your reality. And so it really is up to the individual. And I think many people shy away from doing the hard introspective work, the heart set work, the mindset work. But if you can fix that, you can change your reality and the impact you can make in this world.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. And I agree with that. I think you're right. Like, it's patterns, it's their patterns. And there's always something that we say a lot. I don't know which religious spaces you're in, but in the Christian spaces of like generational curses, right? Sometimes we get things passed down to us that unfortunately were not our battles, but I always hear like it's the battle that your grandmother couldn't fight. It's a battle her mother couldn't fight. It's a battle that her grandmother didn't fight. And when we grow up under racism or any sort of discrimination, that can put shackles on our minds to the point where we are unable to see the value in even dreaming or thinking outside of the confines of what we've experienced. It's like, if my grandmother was this and my mother was this, well, maybe I'm going to be this. And I can't get out of that. I think in America, there's this quote that's all over the place. You've probably heard it because this woman is Oprah. Yeah. She is the Oprah. But there's this quote that's all over the place. And I'm growing up, I would see it all over TV. And Oprah would talk about like not wanting to be a washerwoman like her grandmother. And sometimes people would say she had the audacity. Like, oh my God, she had the audacity to not want to be a washerwoman. But the truth is, if she didn't have that mindset, she wouldn't be who she is today.
For sure, Sarah.
I love what you talked about transcending like parenting and understanding like you have to also parent yourself. Give yourself what you didn't have. What do you think about that? About giving ourselves what our parents didn't necessarily give us in terms of mindset?
Absolutely. I mean, salutes to my parents. Both of them grew up in dysfunctional, homes, but through God, and I believe, I come from the Christian faith as well. The course of their life changed positively. But there were also many gaps because they didn't have the tools or they didn't have all the resources, right? So I realized that while I had a strong foundation and I came from a nurturing, supportive environment, there was lots that was up to me. What I couldn't get from my parents, I needed to address. I needed to fix. I needed to close those gaps so that I step up for the next generation, for my kids and their kids. So there is an element of personal responsibility that you've got to take on regardless. And, going back to what you saw about those generational curses and, the shackles that can be placed on individuals, I witnessed that growing up in a segregated racial community in South Africa. And I would say easily 80% of people who grew up in those communities couldn't see their reality beyond the walls of those communities. It's like, this is what my grandfather was, this is who my dad was, this is what he did, and this is what I'm going to do until the day I die. And they just kept repeating the cycles. They couldn't see a way out or an alternative. And there was this othering, a different version of like, those opportunities are for them. It's not for me. Almost like you're not good enough. And, I understand social oppressions they do sort of frame the mindset, but you can overcome them if you believe enough in yourself and your ability to transcend those limitations that have been imposed on you.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, and also thank you for shedding light on like the South African experience, because I don't know about anybody else listening, but I grew up from the U.S., but I think we kind of had this obsession with South Africa through Mandela being such a huge like global international figure and icon, but also now we have South Africans like Trevor Noah speaking, openly about growing up when there were anti-miscegenation laws in South Africa. And his mother having to pretend to be, a helper versus his mother, all different types of things. So I'm very familiar with the townships and the reality of being a person of color or an African person, South African person in South Africa. So thank you for shedding light on that. And I think in the U.S., it's the same thing. We have a history here of enslavement, We have a history here of segregation, and then I come from an immigrant family. So my family immigrated from Jamaica to the U.S. So that also having to integrate to a new culture, a different culture where you go from being the majority to the minority.
Wow.
That was something my family experienced. So I love the fact that you are shedding light on the fact that these experiences do affect our mindset, and we can't act like they don't. But like you said, we still can be positive in spite of that and be mindful of where we need to grow from previous generations.
And doing the hard work. Nobody said it's easy. But, you know, if you, and this is something else my dad used to say, have thick skin. Treat it like water on a duck's back. If somebody says nasty things to you, because so many times we get tripped up by what people say or do to us, and then we get locked in that victim mentality, victim mindset, and we can't make progress. So, you know, insulating yourself almost from the negativity and just having a laser focus in terms of this is what I'm going after and I'm not going to let anybody stop me. So, yeah, mindset is powerful.
Yeah, so we're speaking about mindset. And the last question for this impact discussion segment, the last question I have for you is, what can we do? Like, tangibly, the listeners want to know, what can we do to create a more positive mindset and self-belief to propel us into success? What are some things you recommend for us to do?
So the first thing I would say is you've got to recognize the limiting mindsets. So it goes back to reflecting on what's been holding me back. You know, in fact, funny you say that. I think it was yesterday morning, I just decided to sit down and think about, you know, reflect on the recent sort of past of my career and some of the lessons I've learned. And I thought, I don't think there's going to be many. I thought maybe I'd have 5 to 7. When I ended up, it was 20, you know, but most of us don't take the time to sit and reflect and ask ourselves, what experiences have shaped me? You know, what is really holding me back? Dig below the surface. Most of us know the surface answers, but digging below the surface and what are the things that have held us back? Because you can only overcome them and move forward if you know what the roadblocks have been, because then you can address them, deal with them, move on, you know, to a more sort of overcoming position, more positive mindset. So the first thing is to reflect, do introspection. You know, was there an incident? Did somebody speak something negative over your life? Did you have an encounter at work that sort of just turned off the switch for you in a particular area and changed the way you thought about yourself, your potential, your career? And how can you undo that? And how can you move past that?
Yeah.
So first is reflect, introspect, and then identify, okay, so where do I want to go? If in a perfect world, if I could sort of just wave a magic wand now, what do I want my life to look like? What do I want my career to look like? So you know where you are, you know where you want to go, and then you start plotting the steps to get there. So then you have to, so if I'm at point A and I want to get to point C, okay, what is the point in between or the points in between and the things I need to do to be able to reach my goals? So I think, you know, just understanding your status quo currently, setting a goal, and then charting a course from where you are to where you need to be, because that will be unique based on each person's circumstance. And you really need those 2 points in order to sort of map out the journey before you.
Yeah, no, I definitely love that. And I also can relate to the element of timing, because it's funny that you were just sitting down and writing down the lessons. I literally have taken, and I'm going to create an episode specifically on this, but I've taken steps at 23 years old to finally start going to therapy for things that people had said to me growing up, to remove those limiting beliefs. And, you know, I'm doing it now because I'm like, I need to lay the foundation now that I don't look back on my life when I get older and say, wow, I have so many regrets because I didn't believe I was good enough to take this chance or to be this person. And it's funny because after 2 sessions, I saw myself making decisions differently. I saw myself thinking differently, and even being able to, I would say, let go of the things that no longer serve me. And that was hard, because it's always hard to let go of things that no longer serve us. But I think, like you, I'm on this quest to identify what has been holding me back. Why is it holding me back? And how can I propel myself forward, you know, to do what ultimately, because I'm spiritual too, what God wants me to do. So I've been thinking about that, and it's just like this conversation is coming at the right time because I literally just made a decision, literally before getting on this call, that I was struggling to make for months. But I finally found the confidence to realize limiting beliefs are holding me back. Go and make this decision, and I'm
Wow.
walking in a
Oh,
lightness.
wow.
Like, wow, I made that
Wow.
decision, and it's paying off.
That is
It's
awesome.
gonna pay off.
Congratulations. Because, I've in my work now, I see how many people recognize the need for help or change, but somehow they're
Yeah.
intimidated by just taking that step towards what they need. There's something that holds them
Hmm.
back from just taking the step, stepping out into and toward the thing that you need. So well done on being brave enough to say this needs to be done to clear the path so I can, move forward into my purpose. You're living out your purpose now, but you want to remove any other potential obstacles that could limit your progress and success. So yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're on the path. So speaking of purpose, we're going to start with the people. So you know who you are as a person. We always say we're the podcast for the people, the career, the culture. So we're going to start with this people section, and we're going to start with who you are. So I have a question, and it's about the 80s, and it's about South Africa. So hopefully you can help our obsession with South Africa, because we want to know, like, what was like in the 80s in South Africa. So my question for you is, what landscape did growing up in the 80s and in South Africa create for you? Like, what was that time like in your life?
Yeah, it was such what's the word? A contrasting time. I think if I think of my
Mm,
childhood, it was very simple. It was fun. It was, you know, as kids of color growing up in apartheid South Africa, we were somewhat oblivious to the reality around us. But we saw the evidence of the destructive force of apartheid similarly around us. So we lived in this bubble of just
yeah.
making ourselves happy in our little communities. Um, but things like gang violence and so, all sort of family violence and those things which were just rife in the community, which we knew, I guess, within each person, that that's not right, that that's not the way life should
Mm,
be, that that's a social ill, even though you may not have a label for it, but this is just wrong, right? So you grew up with that knowledge that there's something going on around me that's not quite right, but okay, you kind of insulate yourself and you just try to be this happy kid. And then in the 80s, I was probably, yeah, what, 10, going on to my teenage years. I think as I got to high school, I became more aware of the political situation and the political dynamics.
mm,
And then started realizing that, okay, so I am disadvantaged, I'm deprived, I have less rights than other people in this country. I have less opportunity than other people in this country. But, going back to the words my father spoke to me, I knew that if I didn't push past the limitations, that what I saw around me would become my reality. And I didn't want that reality for myself. So I think in my mind, I said to myself, I'm a, a kid, a colored kid growing up in apartheid South Africa. And I
mm.
don't have a lot of resources. There aren't opportunities for me, but I'm not going to let that hold me back, because if I do, this is going to become my reality. And I don't want to be stuck in poverty, social
Yeah.
ills. So I'm going to find whatever mechanism or way I can to jump the fence almost, and find a better reality for myself outside. And so what I witnessed around me in terms of the social ills, and then becoming more politically conscious, you saw the activist movements around key days when Nelson Mandela was released. I mean, the time he was still in prison, we used to start seeing, you know, things around that and became more politically aware. I think that's when the activist
Mhm.
in me, or the advocate in me, also started, um, being
Yeah.
birthed. Because when graduated as a professional, as an optometrist, immediately I started seeing the disparities in access to eye care. And I'm like, this is not right. You know, I come from a disadvantaged background. Until I started studying optometry, I'd never been for an eye exam. I didn't know anybody in my family who'd been for an eye exam. So I'm here. I've got a lovely job working in a private optometry practice, serving people. But I know that two-thirds of the population does not have access to this. And how can I be part of the
Yeah.
solution? So the seeds for who I am today were planted in the 80s by what I witnessed, experienced, lived out, became sort of socially, and politically aware. And then I realized that I needed to be part of the change I wanted to see in society.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's this whole like element and theme of this episode of being a change maker and like what it means to be a change maker. I want to share with you. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the work of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, but she is a writer and she wrote about the dangers of a single story. And she's from Nigeria, and she talks about leaving Nigeria and finally having to, I guess, grapple with the fact that she's seen as black or she's seen as othered. And it just shows you that I guess you had a similar experience, if I'm not mistaken, having to go from the confines of your home where, your father's pouring into you, your mother's pouring into you. You're seen as, a beautiful, wonderful child, blessed from God, etc. All these things. But the world is saying something else. The world is reinforcing something that might not align with how you see yourself. So I that's very interesting because I often see that contrast that many of us have between the messages that we got that were positive versus what the world, the society, the government reinforced,
Yeah, I remember, funny enough, I had two jobs before I left clinical practice as an optometrist. The first was in a colored community. So these were people who looked like me, who I fitted in, and so they never questioned my authority in the consulting room. My second job was a practice that served predominantly white patients. And so very often, if not almost always, when I took the patient into the consulting room, they were expecting someone else to follow after me. And when I started the eye exam, they're like, but where's the doctor? So, but, I almost expected that. So I didn't take offense. And my mindset is like, I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to neutralize those perceptions. When you leave here today, you'll have a different view of people of color in a professional capacity. So again, coming back to that mindset, how do you respond to the seemingly negative, I don't know, inputs from society? You can use it to your advantage, or you can use it to your disadvantage. If you take it, become offended, start riling up about it, or you could say, no, I'm going to use this as a platform to educate, inform, win someone over, change their perceptions, and chart a new course, chart a new reality. And that's really what the mindset I adopted, is that I'm not going to take offense. I understand where they're coming from. This was a pollution of the mind and people's perceptions of others. And so I now have the opportunity to change that.
Yeah, I love that. I would love to know, what were your earliest memories of apartheid, and when you recognized that it was an institution that would try to shape your reality?
Yeah, so one of my earliest memories, I was still young, and so I didn't know about, I could have been maybe 5 years old, I don't know. And I remember my mum taking me downtown, and then we were headed back home. We went shopping, and we were waiting at the bus stop. And a nice looking, sort of blue, more luxury looking bus came past. And I'm like, Mom, there's the bus, and she's like, no, we can't take that bus. We have to wait for the blue bus. Okay. Not wanting to explain to me that this is a bus for white people and we have to wait for our bus. Eventually the blue bus came, and it kind of just looks like a tin on wheels, but didn't really put two and two together, took my mother's words for what they were. As I grew older, and for example, we went to the beach, there were benches then and washrooms that said, for whites only. And then we were told, no, we can't sit on those benches, or we can't use those bathrooms. We have to use these ones. So that's when I thought, okay, so now I'm less than. I think that's when the messaging, and by this time I was probably 8 or 10 years old, started being aware that, okay, I'm not in the advantaged class here. There are certain things that are not for me that I can't access. And so that's when I started becoming aware of that. And I think tried to process it for a long time. But as I got older, as I said, into my teens, I realized that it's up to me. I could either let this hold me back, or I could push past this and chart a course for myself. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Love that. And I'm curious to during that time, what was the internal monologue that guided you during your childhood and your upbringing? And how did those early experiences, albeit painful, how do those lessons affect how you viewed success, ambition, and even subsequently like your career?
I think when I became aware that I was inferior, if I can use that term, or at least the social structure in society, made me or categorized me as inferior. I think to a large extent, I adopted a more subservient attitude in those earlier years. If you go to, a service center and you're attended to by a white person, your body language, your voice tone, everything became more subservient. You realize the power, they have power over you. And I recognized that for a long time, that was the pattern, you know, almost like you're waiting for handouts, or they can make a decision for or against a benefit that you might have been wanting to apply for, whatever the case might be. And I can't say exactly when that power shift happened. And possibly it could be related to sort of messages of fate, just reinforcing the value we are as humans and that God created all of us equal and those sort of things, that I realized that, no, I'm not subject to another person, another man, another woman, of a different race simply because they are a different race or they're white. They're not superior to me. God created all of us equal. So I think the faith message trumped the social and political message. And I started owning more of my power, who I was as a person. And, I use the term colored now, not because I for a long time, even now, I'm a citizen of the world. I'm not a colored. In South Africa, I used to say, I'm a South African. I don't want a label. I don't want us to refer to people as white and black. And we are people. People are people, and we should just see each other as they are. But in reality, we still see people in boxes, right? But I think when the faith message trumped the social and political message, I took my power back and I realized that it's up to me. And I'm going to, even if I've encountered a person with a bad attitude, a racist attitude, wanting to limit my progress, I'm not going to let that stand in my way, and I'm going to forge forward. So yeah, those were the internal messages. And then eventually there was a shift to where I was in the driver's seat. I thought, I'm not going to let someone else shape my future and my reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, key word, the driver's seat. That's yeah. We're having a class right now, y'all. Write down the driver's seat. I agree 100% with everything you said, especially about the role of faith in helping us to go from powerless to powerful. And I think that even if we look at the parallels between apartheid in South Africa, and we can say like Jim Crow, racism, the civil rights movement in America, faith was the vehicle that even people realize I am not less than. I am less than what people have told me, or who told me I'm less than. I am not under what people have told me I'm destined to be over, right? And I think we've had to go through that as a people, and I'm grateful that you had that. You had that moment of noticing, like you talked about, you noticed that your body language would be different, and you would maybe code switch or maybe, do different things. But then you ended that segment by saying that you knew nobody else was going to be in the driver's seat of your life. And that lets me know you were able to glean strength from these experiences rather than let them swallow you and from you your light. So I think that's amazing. I think that's an amazing reflection on the power of perseverance, especially in the face of discrimination. Because y'all, we can do it, and we have done it.
For sure.
We'll do it.
And every life has value. Every person is powerful, So yeah, find your power, own it, and run with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Find your power, own it, and run with it. So speaking of power, I think you have a powerful calling. So our next section of the podcast talks about career. And this is where we go into like, okay, stemming from who I am, what did I decide I wanted to do? So you had all these foundational formative experiences, and you even talked a little bit about your time in optometry. So I want to really delve into your calling in public health and like where that has led you. So the first question I have in this section is, you said that you felt called to a career in public health. What were the underlying aspects or experiences that led to that experience of calling or feeling called to that sector?
Sure. I referenced sort of my reflection in private practice when I recognized that the patients I was seeing walking through the door pretty much mostly looked the same. If it was people of color, it was people of color who generally were well off. and who could afford eye care
Mm,
services. So, you know, I had this niggling feeling that kept growing and growing and wouldn't go away. It's like, where are the other people, the people I grew up with in my community, the people who grew up in the townships? You know, what are they
mm,
doing with their vision care needs? How are their vision care needs being met? Because at the time, optometry in South Africa was purely privatized. There wasn't, you couldn't go to a public hospital and see an optometrist and get a pair of eyeglasses. You know, if you had an eye problem, well, if you couldn't come up with the money, you kind of just live with your visual impairment. And then the
oh,
cycle, you know, so you can't get certain jobs. You can't become a driver. So taxis are a common thing in South Africa. And it's an easy way for people who don't have an education to earn an income. But you can't get a driver's license if you can't see well. You can't, do crafts and sew clothing, which is also another means of income for people in the townships, or create things because you can't see well, right? So I
mm,
started, and
mm.
that just started increasing and increasing. And I realized, no, I wasn't hearing any messaging, coming from government or in optometry circles around what was being done. And I realized I needed to be part of the solution. If no one's going to do it, I need to
Yeah.
step up. I didn't even know how, to be quite honest, but I just knew that I needed to find a way to highlight this unmet eye care need, to highlight this gap in the health system, and to figure out a way to close the gap. And so I left private practice. I took a sort of a 3 month sabbatical to reflect on how can I forge a career path in public health. And so
Mm,
I started with the masters in public health, and subsequently made strategic connections that led me to really advocating for eye care through first small community projects, going into hospitals, talking to the doctors. Can we have an eye clinic once a month? Test a few people's eyes, find ways to fund the glasses for them. And through these incremental experiences created awareness. And I found that the need just kept getting greater and greater. It was so much of a passion for me. Even if they didn't pay me, I would do it. And that's why I knew this is what I'm called to do. And eye was
mm.
just sort of starting to be put on the global stage. People at the level of the World Health Organization were starting to recognize that, hey, this is a global problem. Basically, if you're poor, you can't access eye care services, or poorer countries generally had less access to eye care services than wealthier countries. And so that was being placed on the map. And then my career sort of evolved into one on a global stage where we were then doing development work, setting up schools of optometry in Mozambique and in Malawi and other African countries and India. We supported some work there. And when I eventually transitioned into academia, I realized that I was at the forefront, not just by myself, a couple of leaders globally that had championed this cause. And I started to see the common thread of using my platform, the profile, in this sort of new space as being an inspirational leader. I took my public health and international development experience into the university and inspire the next generation. And so this thing of being an inspirational leader became a common thread. And that's what I see my calling as now, even with Life Beyond Clinical Practice, the podcast and the Career Pivot strategy program that I run is exactly that. How can I inspire others to live out their purposes? I've been blessed to have the opportunities to make an impact in an identified area of need. And that's just one. There are many. There's so many issues in healthcare. There's so many issues in eye care. How can you find that thing that ignites you, that you can do even if nobody pays you, where you'll serve with passion but make an impact?
Mm.
And so, yeah, I've taken that now to the level of having a platform where I can help others find their niche and grow and scale their professional impact in healthcare.
Yeah, that's amazing and so inspirational, because I think that when I was first crafting this question, my thought process was there are so many people who are in traditional medicine, or even we could say the more profit driven areas of healthcare, that are scared to say, I want to help people that are marginalized. I want to do it for this specific community. I think there's still a lot of fear and even stigmatization for doing
Correct.
anything for the public advocacy or even public health. So I thank you for giving voice to the fact that for you, this is a calling. You saw the need, you created a solution for the need, and you're also inspiring other people, to find that area of healthcare that you said, like find that place where you can serve. And even if you don't make any money, like you'll serve, you'll put that energy into it, you put that work into it, and you fall in love with it almost because it is a part of you. It is deep rooted into who you are to do this work.
You
Absolutely,
know, and
yeah.
Soraya, when you follow your passion and the purpose that's laid on your heart, opportunities,
Mm,
opportunities will come. The doors, employment opportunities you didn't even know were out there will come your way, or project opportunities, or funding, or whatever it might be, whatever shape or form that may take. But it really takes you stepping out in faith first, believing in that cause and stepping out, and then the doors open. And I think too many people are waiting for the doors to open. They're waiting for the writing to be clear on the wall before they step out into the thing that's really bugging them and internalizing them. Another huge problem is I did my postdoctoral fellowship in health professions education. And what I saw, and I was
mm,
also academic leader for teaching and learning at the University of KwaZulu Natal for 8 health science programs. And I saw a common thread is that a lot of this problem stems from how we train health professionals. And there's this one
yeah.
size fits all mindset and model of practice, and we're not nurturing the individual. I had students who in their 40s, they were almost near graduating, and I'm like, oh my goodness, the student is so creative. Why didn't we learn that in their second year where we could incorporate that into their training somehow so that they could
Mm,
feel a sense of passion? It was just a job.
yeah.
They were just getting a degree and they were going to go out and get a job because the thing that really lights them up, we didn't find a way to integrate that into their practice or to point them to job paths that would utilize those things so that they could have better professional fulfillment. So I saw this over the course of my experience in health professions education. I thought something needs to change. And there's millions of people in practice that we can help now. But ultimately, I want to be able to go back to training institutions and say, how can we relook at this model of training? How can we talk about person centered or people centered care in healthcare as a common thing?
Yeah.
But how can we look at that in training? Where's the person centered educational approach in our health professions training program so that we don't ignore the individual behind the student number and they're just another student in a
Yeah.
program and we expect them to fit into a square box? And and they
Hmm.
and they
That's
create
a
it totally
problem.
different. So yeah, so I think my vision is beyond just helping individual health professionals, but this is where I'm starting, is to inspire those with my journey, my lessons, the insights I've gleaned, and help those who want to then redirect their careers into parts within their disciplines or outside of their disciplines, but have a cause that they're passionate about and help them to do that. And eventually work towards how can we integrate this into training programs.
I think that definitely embodies a common struggle that people have, even in the United States. Like it's just a worldwide international struggle of I studied something, I'm in this professional field, but there's no conversation about like, hey, what are the things that naturally light you up, or what
Right.
are the of impact that you can have? That conversation hasn't even reached the mainstream yet. It's still starting salaries.
Right.
How do people view now a doctor, or now I'm a nurse, or now I'm an attorney, or now I'm an engineer? It still is very, if we look at it, just very, very
Yeah.
superficial. And I'm glad that you identified, like, hey, there is this gap in how we're teaching people about jobs. We're just teaching them how to get the job versus how to actually
Oh
design the
yeah.
job or design career in a way that is fulfilling. And I'm excited for like pioneers like yourself and me who are in this
Mm-hmm.
space trying to get to think about
Oh
designing
yeah.
their career and designing their life for meaning and impact, because like you said, there's so many things that we can do and that we can work on, but it oftentimes takes finding the right person or the right people to activate that vision
Mm-hmm.
within you. Like I think all that untapped potential for more, but it takes that activation. It takes getting around people like you or people who are doing the work to make people see there is
Right.
more. There is more,
Definitely.
there is more, and you can be more and pursue more.
For sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So speaking of that, I want to talk about role models, because I can only imagine that a part of this reason why people aren't pursuing, I guess we could say, these more impactful paths or taking these risks is because there's an absence of role models. There's an absence of people who are not just going to be successful, but people who are actually going to say, hey, here's how I did it. And then also, we talked about it in this discussion, lifting other people
Mm-hmm.
up so they can do it too. That is just lacking a lot, that genuine mentorship and role modeling. So I wanted to ask you, because you talked about navigating life without a role model during our pre-call. And I think that's something that is so impactful because, number one, you would never think that you did not have like any real role models in your career because of everything you have achieved. But I know the listeners can relate. I know there are people listening to this that feel like, I want to be where Dr. Diane is, but I don't have anyone in my corner who can actually give me the steps and show me the way. So my question for you is, you talked about navigating life without a plethora of role models. How did that help or even harm your career prospects? And like, where did you eventually find that sense of mentorship?
I think initially it harmed my career prospects. I think it was my final year of high school. I'm not sure exactly when, but I do think it was possibly the final year when we had one sort of time slot in our timetable, which was career guidance. And we never, possibly for the whole year, maybe we had the teacher showed up for two of those sessions, and the rest of the time we were just playing because there was no one to guide us. They didn't tell us, okay, let's do a career assessment. This will be better for you. And that we had none of that. So as a high achiever, I always achieved from, elementary school. As early as I can remember, I always achieved academic prizes at school. I always did well, but I got to my final year of high school and I had no clue what I wanted to study. Because of the absence of role models. My parents, what did they know, Shame? They didn't have any education themselves. They didn't know who to turn to. Um, and so all I knew was that I needed to go to university to get an education so that I could have a better life. This better life than what I saw around me in this colored community. And so I also was in a science stream. And I think because of social conditioning, I felt that I needed to be in a health professional designation. So I applied for general
Mm-hmm.
health sciences. Um, I think in my first year, I actually studied computer science. I don't know how that happened and failed miserably because I'd never seen a computer until the day I entered university. Did that for 6 months. It didn't work out. Left, tried to figure out what next, and then went back to the science stream. And honestly applied for all the health sciences, pharmacy, dentistry. And I'm like, whichever one accepts me, I'm going to go for that because at least when I'm done with my degree, I will have a title. I will be a pharmacist or I will be a physiotherapist and I'll be able to get a job. So that was really my objective. It was a health profession. I would be helping people. And I will have a professional designation where I can immediately step into a job and start earning. And so optometry, I always say optometry found me. I didn't find it because when I got accepted into optometry, they were the first program to accept me. And I'm like, yes, I'm going for it. All I knew is that it had something to do with the eyes and something to do with glasses. And despite it not being a purposeful choice of career and me not really even knowing what I was getting myself into, because of my mindset, and I was intentional about making a success of my career, this profession has been so good to me. The doors that have been opened, I count myself amongst a few handful of optometrists in the world who have had some of the most incredible career experiences globally. And I think it was really just about that persistent mindset of where I wanted to go. But in the course of sort of my undergraduate studies and later in my professional life, I did encounter mentors who then I looked up to as role models. Oh, wow, look what they've achieved. And here's at least a semblance of a path that I can follow if I want to also move beyond where I am. So, yeah, I definitely identified that one of my early professors, he was phenomenal. He was actually my professor when I was doing my undergrad. And then he came to the US to do his postgrad and eventually came back to South Africa and started the International Development Organization, which I eventually worked for. And he took me under his wing. And honestly, it's through him that I found my voice. I think I was still somewhat
Yeah.
shy and intimidated. And I'm like, he used to take me to all these global meetings where they were advocating for eye care. And I would sit there quiet because, again, I'm this colored girl. Who am I to say anything? What my opinion doesn't matter. There's all these important white professionals, professors from wherever and chairpersons of this organization. And I felt like I was
Yeah.
just insignificant in those spaces. And I recall so many
Mm,
times he would nudge me and he'd say, speak, say something. And I just felt like my words
yeah.
did not have power. But you know what? I started realizing that actually I can play in the space because one of these important white men with a fancy title and a fancy suit would say something in the meeting. And I'm like, but I just thought that 5 minutes ago. So I started
Yeah.
realizing that I need to find my voice because my voice has power. My ideas have power. They are valid. They are where they are because they're confident enough to speak what's on their mind, to share their opinions, to, bring issues on the table. And that's when I started to
Mm,
find my voice. Professor Kovanaidu was the greatest mentor in my professional growth career because he really unlocked my voice and made me realize what I can achieve if I'm confident enough to just speak my truth in whatever space I find myself in. So grateful to him. And, when I was still in private practice, Dr. Chris Fall was phenomenal. He was just a trailblazer in the business space. And I watched him really
mm.
challenge the norms, challenge the status quo albeit in business, but in creative ways, think outside of the box. And that's what I took away from that mentorship relationship is that I don't have to settle with the way things are. The way things are does not have to be the reality for the next generation or for the next 5 years or 10 years. I have it within myself
Gosh.
to change that reality, to improve on the way things are by championing my ideas. And that's exactly, I take the lessons from those two role models have really shaped the course of my life, my career, and now my entrepreneurial endeavors.
Yeah, I honestly, one of my favorite quotes is that the teacher appears when the student is ready.
Wow. Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I strategically said in this question is both help and harm, because for some of us, we might have felt like the absence of role models harmed us. And it might have, but could it also have been the catalyst for you to have a deeper sense of empathy for those who are coming up after you? Or could it also have been the catalyst for you to pursue something truly unique? I think oftentimes when I see people who do very groundbreaking work, they will say, well, I didn't know anybody who did
Oh,
this. I
yeah.
didn't know anybody who had a with this problem that I had. And I felt like I was weird and I felt like I was the weird one. But it's often these things that open the door for us to be the one that people said, okay, because Dr. Diane
Oh,
did
for
it, I
sure.
can do it. She did something unique. She came from our township. She came from where we're from, but she was able to do that. And the reason why I ask that is because I'm one of those people who, in my story, is that I struggle to find role models on my path.
Right.
Entrepreneurship is risky.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
unpredictable. It's very, very different. And I'm not only an entrepreneur, but I'm also a podcaster and I'm trying to do this thing. And I still don't have a lot of role models. But what I would say is, that's why I built this podcast, because I wanted to connect with people, to hear their stories, to hear stories like yours, Dr. Diane, of just relatability of like, some of us didn't have all the
Mm-hmm.
models, but we still figured it out through
Facts.
faith, through hard work. And then when we finally got to that level where the mentor showed up, it just
Oh,
accelerated
for
us further.
sure.
So thank you for that. I needed to hear what you're saying as someone currently navigating that. Don't exactly have someone doing what I'm doing, but I do think that's the beauty of it, because I can be that person where people say, if Soraya did it, I
Right.
can do it
Right. You
too.
didn't have a roadmap. You charted your own course, made a success of it, and it becomes, yeah, inspiring for the next person who wants to do it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. So now we want to talk about culture, and we have a whole section on culture where we discuss the cultural impacts of your work. So one thing that I think is really fascinating about you is just how multifaceted you are. But there's this core that you're like, this core of like, you're talking about like health, like service, etc. So I want to ask you, right? You became an optometrist. And then a health professional career strategist. On top of this, you're engaged in advocacy roles, community campaigns, and academia. What drives your sustained passion for such a multifaceted and winding path?
I think, opportunities evolve. We evolve as
Mm.
individuals. The landscape within which we work evolves. Pardon me. And so I'm always attuned to the changing dynamics around me and the emerging needs. So we need to be agile. We need to be able to shift. We need to be sort of open to always evolving as health professionals. I don't believe there's one path. The generation that sort of started a job at General Motors and worked there for 50 years until they retired, and that was their life, career story, that's over. Times are moving so fast now that we have to be attuned with where things are going and shift as we go along. So yeah, nuances in my career from private practice, public health, international development, academia, and now to, career pivot strategies. It's nuances. I'm not in a completely different path, but it's nuances that as things are shifting in the landscape around me and needs change and demands change, I'm
Yeah.
able to move with the current and still make an impact and still inspire and still be a role model in championing new causes. So yeah, that's the way I see it, as that, being attuned to shifting currents, and how you can use your profile, your platform, your resources to continue to fulfill your calling. And that's what I've been doing over the course of my career.
Yeah, Diane, I feel like I love talking to you because you understand this calling and
Mm-hmm.
purpose talk. And a lot of us don't. So when people see people like yourself that wear so many different hats, I immediately identified your purpose is not the vehicle that you exercise that purpose through. It's through different roles. So I think we have to learn to separate our purpose from our actual job
Right,
title,
right.
right? Purpose can be healthcare and health equity, but you can do that through
Oh,
technology, that through speaking, you can do that through
oh, for
advocacy,
sure.
podcasting, etc., training up professionals. So I think that you have mastered that delineation between purpose versus my role or my actual career, because a lot of us we haven't gotten
Right.
there yet because we still think that because I run a tech company, that's all I can do. No, if your purpose is to inspire, right, you can inspire through technology and you can
Oh,
inspire
for
through
sure.
content, right? Find your purpose and tap into that deeper level, because I think from there it makes it so easy to be multifaceted, because it's like you're just trying to find vehicles to
That's right.
exercise the type of change you want to bring into the
I
world,
think you said that perfectly. Absolutely. We mustn't be tied to job titles, professional titles. They are merely just a sort of a part to us fulfilling our purpose. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And like you said, they changed so
Mm-hmm.
much. Like I can only imagine like back in the day there were like file clerks. Nobody's really a file clerk anymore unless you're for the courts.
Right.
People have everything is
Yeah.
digitized. Things are moving fast. Technology has changed a lot of things. So now we have chief AI, artificial intelligence officers. We have different roles that will emerge as time goes on. And I think when you tap into your calling versus your career, you understand, hey, my calling can take so many different forms. Let me remain agile and jump on the opportunities when I see them versus being tied to the role, being tied to the
Mm-hmm.
title, because that's dangerous,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially as things change
For
so
sure.
quickly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So how would you advise someone who like wants to engage in a more dynamic career path, but might lack that confidence to do so? How would you advise clients or people that you work with who want to be more dynamic, but they just lack the confidence to branch
I
out?
think find role models. If you can't, there's many resources out there, such as podcasts. Listen to inspiring leaders, read inspirational books that can sort of boost your confidence to see if other people have done it, or what are the things I need to do to be able to be more confident in pursuing a new path. So books, podcasts, mindset, role models, join masterminds. Surround yourself with a nurturing environment, an environment that will help push you towards where you want to go. If you're just an island and you're sitting with these self-limiting thoughts, it's going to be very difficult to move you to the next stage. So if you really are desiring to pursue your path, find your path, whatever it is, connect with the community. There's so many communities online, listen to different podcasts, find something to keep the inspiration going, because it's easy for that idea to die down when life happens and you just get drawn back into the routine of life. But if you say, I'm going to listen to one podcast every week and I'm going to find a book on, living with intention or whatever it is, And as you do that, start journaling. Journaling is very powerful. Sit and have your quiet time
Yeah.
and reflect. And what are the things that are coming to your heart? What are the things that you're feeling more strongly about? Which direction are you feeling called to? And then start shaping your new path in that direction. So those are just some of the things that people can do to help themselves move forward.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. I appreciate that, and I think that you're right. Like, really get into that enriched environment. Get around the people. I always say this: like, get around the people that are
You
doing
want to
what
do.
you.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah, get around them because you're in new air. You're
Right.
breathing new air. Like, even before I decided to become an entrepreneur, I interned for entrepreneurs as a college student, and I was a second semester college senior. So, it's kind of like, oh, you're graduating, you're not going to take on an internship. I took on an internship with a startup, and then I ended up building my own. So I
Fantastic.
think when you get around people that, especially when it comes to entrepreneurship or even career pivoting, that spirit is
Oh,
contagious, and it's going to get you to want to do and want to push and want to pursue. My whole circle now, and I'm blessed to say this, is value aligned. We're
wow, that's
mission aligned,
awesome. Yeah.
purpose driven people. And I think that's what helps me to stay on the path even when it's difficult. This podcast has helped me to build connections with people all across the world who
Fantastic.
share my ideals and values. And like you said, like when we answer to life, when
Oh,
we
yeah.
answer to our calling, doors just trickle down, the connections, the resources, things move, and our life just changes. So I totally agree. Like it starts with just taking that step and being around that enriched
Oh, that
environment.
enriched environment. You said it so well because it's so nurturing and inspiring, but also it helps you to see what's possible. And that keeps you
Yeah.
going.
Ooh.
So even if you hit
Mm,
stumbling blocks, you can, man, so and so has already, overcome
mm.
that, and they've got some strategies to help me, and you just keep going. It's almost like you've got this group of people just nudging you forward, and so yeah, find your
Yeah,
tribe,
absolutely.
find people who are aligned with where you want to go.
Absolutely. So, last question. Speaking of forward, one of the things that we like to do on this podcast is I just love to talk about where we want to be because I think everyone that comes on here is so ambitious, so dedicated, so motivated that I would love to have a conversation about where you see yourself. So, I remember you told me that you see yourself authoring a book and speaking on international stages. So, I want to know, Dr. Diane set the intention. Let here first that you set that intention for the book and you set that intention for the international speaking career. So I would love to know, like, what would you title this book? And then what stages do you envision yourself speaking on?
Sure. Thank you for giving me the giving me the opportunity to speak it into being. So the book would definitely be titled "Designing Your Purposeful Career" as a path
Okay.
to impact and influence. And that's really the
Mm,
message I speak on my podcast. When we design our
yeah.
careers intentionally around purpose, it creates opportunities for impact and influence. And the stages I'd like to speak
Mm,
on, well, this is a big one. Probably it's going to be my pivotal one is to give a TED talk on the same topic.
yeah.
And
Mm,
I alluded to wanting to take this message to health professions training programs. I would really like to speak on international stages at health professions conferences to create more awareness around how we need to change the way we train and the way we sort of almost undo the conditioning around clinical training and clinical professions and incorporating more of who people are in the training program so they can find their purposeful paths. So that's sort of broadly where I want to go and where I would like to go with this. Thank you.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I see it. I see the book. I think like this episode has shown us that you have a wealth of wisdom. So I'm sure like when that opportunity comes up, it's going to happen for you. It's going to happen for you. And we're going to be so excited. I'll be following along and looking for that. And then yes, TED X, where y'all are at because where are y'all at? Because Diane has the wisdom and she has the experience. So yes, I'm manifesting that TED Talk for
Thank
you.
you
Thank
so
you so
much.
much. It was so beautiful and wonderful to share this time with you. This has been filled with gems. I'm excited for the people to hear this. And Diane, any last words before before we end the interview? Any last words for our
Wow.
audience?
Keep pursuing what's on your heart. I think
Hmm.
you thanked me before we started this interview, Soraya, for reaching out to you. And the reason I reached out to you is because I saw the alignment. And when you are confident with
Hmm.
what's on your heart, you'll pursue the things that are out there and you'll find people who are aligned with your dream. And so that's the message I want to leave
Yeah.
with the audience. You need to find the confidence to believe in your thing and then the resolve to pursue it. And you will find the people who will help nurture your dreams and your goals and your career path and whatever that might be. But yeah, it starts with believing and pursuing and being confident to just chart your course. So hopefully that's been an inspiration to the listeners. It's been such a blessing being on this podcast today. Thank you so much for your wisdom and your time and just doing the work you're doing. This is such powerful work. It's uncharted territory. I know more attention is being placed on this increasingly now, but it's something that people have not thought about. But just being purposeful in our careers,
Hmm.
and you're
Yeah.
doing phenomenal work. And I just wish you well. I know you're going to do great things in this space.
Thank you so much, Diane. Thank you, and thank you because your words of wisdom are coming in handy. Because yes, I am raising investment to expand.
Fantastic.
So it's tough, but I think I believe in my
Oh,
dreams. I believe in
that,
my dreams, and I've been putting in the work. I've tested the concept, and I'm ready to expand into a full fledged media company. So cross your
wow,
fingers with
awesome.
that. I'm excited. Thank you. So this is coming at the right moment because I really truly do believe, and I think I didn't have the belief when I first started because I was like, are people going to want to be a part of it? Are people
Right.
interested? But I see people are interested, want to be a part of it. And thank you for that because it's all coming together at the right time. So thank you,
Fantastic.
Diane. Yeah.
It's a pleasure.
All right,
Thank
y'all.
you.
We're out.
Bye.
All right.